Chapter 3. Hair. James's sister Lauren had wanted to dye her hair black since she was 6 years old, but her mum wouldn't let her, no matter how much she whined. The only thing that stopped Lauren doing it in the near 2 years since her mum had died was a sense that it would have been disrespecting her memory. In the end, it took heavy persuasion from Lauren's best friend, Bethany Parker, who claimed she'd bought black hair dye by mistake. Lauren couldn't understand how you accidentally bought hair dye and didn't believe Bethany's claim for a millisecond. But once the dye was right there, on the bathroom shelf, she couldn't resist. Lauren was fairly happy with the result, especially when she put on her black Linkin Park t-shirt and ripped jeans, and mussed her hair up so that it looked punky. But she wasn't totally confident, and she couldn't help staring at herself every time she passed something reflective, as though the 1000th glance would reveal some miraculous truth not imparted by the previous 999. She was in a sore mood as she walked along a corridor towards the pre-training briefing, PTB, classroom, because 4 lads had ganged up on her in the last lesson of the afternoon and spent the whole time taking the mickey out of her hair. It didn't hurt her feelings, because they were the sort of idiots who would have made fun of anything she'd done. But they'd been in her face for the best part of an hour, and it ended up severely getting on her nerves. The worst part was having to sit there with a tight grin, taking whatever they threw at her, because she knew any sign that they were getting under her skin would only encourage them. Lauren checked her watch as she passed through an open door into the PTB classroom and headed for a long table marked with a plastic sign saying Team D. Teams A to C, each 5 strong, were gathered noisily around some of the other tables. Team C was jointly led by James's girlfriend Kerry and her best friend Gabrielle, while Team A was led by James's best friend, Kyle. Lauren sat down next to Bethany Parker. Bethany's little brother Jake sat opposite, and Dana Cheesy Smith was at the other end of the table, as far from everyone else as she could get. Jake was 9 years old. He wouldn't be able to enter basic training until he turned 10, but his education was already being geared towards becoming a CHERUB agent. On top of normal lessons, Jake had daily karate and judo sessions and was almost fluent in Spanish and French. Now he was set for his first taste of outdoor CHERUB training as the most junior member of Team D. Dana was a 14-year-old tomboy who'd been recruited to CHERUB from an Australian children's home. She sat with her legs out straight and her arms folded over a filthy combat jacket. Dana had been a qualified CHERUB agent for 4 years, but while an imposing physique had taken her to numerous karate trophies and 3 wins in CHERUB's annual triathlon, her mission performance had been unspectacular, and she still wore a grey shirt. Lauren half smiled as she grabbed a chair. "Hello, Dana." "Hello, boss," Dana sneered in her Australian accent, without bothering to change her "no one likes me, I don't care" scowl. Lauren had discovered that being one of the youngest Navy shirts on campus was a mixed blessing. It was cool in a way, but it was awkward when she found herself outranking kids who were several years older. "Where's your big bro?" Dana asked, as Lauren dragged her chair up to the table. "James won't make it to this briefing," Lauren said. "I'll have to make notes for him. He should be back by 8 o'clock. Jake butted in. "Your hair looks ridiculous." Lauren bunched a fist. "Not as ridiculous as your face will be in a minute." Jake tutted contemptuously. "I'm so scared." Lauren looked at Bethany and shook her head. "Boys are such morons." "Tell me about it," Bethany said, giving her brother a withering look. The classroom went silent as CHERUB's most ruthless training instructor stepped in. Mr. Large was tailed by 2 of his assistants, Mr. Pike and Mr. Greaves. The 2 younger men perfectly fitted the CHERUB instructor mould. Tall, fit, in their late 20s, with the physiques of heavyweight boxers. Greaves and Pike were both ex-CHERUB agents who had pursued careers in elite military units after they'd retired. Everyone was scared of Mr. Large, but Lauren had more cause than most. Mr. Large still held a monster grudge against her for knocking him into a muddy hole with a spade. "Silence, you pigs!" Mr. Large yelled as he slammed the classroom door. Bethany leaned over and whispered in Lauren's ear. "His mustache has got bigger. It looks like he's got a gerbil sellotaped to his lip." Lauren was tickled by the image of Mr. Large sticking a rodent to his face. She couldn't help giggling, and a second later, Mr. Large was screaming at her. "What's so amusing, young lady?" "Nothing, sir," Lauren said, grinding her teeth as she realised that attracting Mr. Large's attention was the absolute worst thing she could have done. "So you're laughing at nothing? What's the matter? Have you gone mad? Get to your feet, girl. Everyone stands to attention when they're talking to me." Lauren stood up sharply. "I see you've earned a navy t-shirt already," Mr. Large spat, "and the black hair to suit your black little heart. I still think of you every morning, Lauren Adams, when I wake up with that pain in my back where you hit me. I should be in Norway with Mr. Speaks and Miss Smoke right now, running basic training. But my bad back means I'm stuck here, looking at your disgusting fat little face. You're puke, Adams. What are you?" "Puke, sir," Lauren answered, brimming with rage as she remembered the hours of torture Mr. Large had put her through during basic training. She would have felt guilty if she'd injured anyone except him. "Stand up front by the blackboard. You can help me with a little demonstration in a moment." Lauren took a stroppy walk towards the blackboard while Mr. Large looked around the room. "Is everyone here?" After a pause, he answered his own question. "Where is the elder brother of Puke?" "He got called onto a mission early this morning," Bethany explained, "but he should be back by 8 o'clock. "Perfect," Mr. Large steamed, scowling at Lauren as if she was somehow to blame for this. Lauren propped herself against the blackboard. Gabrielle and Kerry both looked at her sympathetically and shrugged, as if to say, "What can you do?" "So, my little cupcakes," Large said, "this exercise is designed to give you all experience of working as a team in a highly pressurized environment. For some of you, it will be your first experience of mission training, while the older members will have their leadership and team building skills put to the test. The basic rules are as follows. There are 4 teams of 5. Each team is led by an experienced agent ranked Navy T-shirt or higher. They will be accompanied by 3 other qualified agents ranked Grey or Navy. Finally, each team contains a 9-year-old redshirt who will be getting their first taste of advanced CHERUB training. Every team member will be given 6 eggs, with their names written on the shells. That's 30 eggs per team. You must carry these eggs about your person at all times. After a short drive to the SAS training centre down the road, the 4 teams will be released into the Urban Warfare Training Compound at 2000 hours this evening. The winners will be whichever team is in possession of the largest number of their own unbroken eggs 12 hours later. That's 0800 hours tomorrow morning. To help focus your tiny minds, the team or teams finishing up with the lowest number of unbroken eggs will enjoy an extra long cold shower before accompanying me on a cross-country run with heavy packs immediately after the training session is over. The team leaders must decide on strategy. You can be passive, by hiding yourselves, or aggressive by going out and hunting down members of other teams to destroy their eggs. You'll find useful extra equipment scattered around the training area. The only rules are that you must release any prisoners you capture as soon as they have surrendered their eggs. Also, you can't remove anyone's protective clothing, use physical torture, shoot your weapons at targets less than 3 meters away. Oh, and you can't kick the boys in the balls. The girls all groaned. You will be wearing tracking devices fitted with emergency buttons. That means I know where you are at all times, and I can come into the compound and pluck you out if you break the rules or if there's an accident. There are also surveillance cameras throughout the compound. A siren will go off to signal the end of the exercise, or if we need to suspend the exercise while we deal with an emergency. You will all be armed with the latest in combat simulation technology. It's a system of synthetic ammunition that was designed for training the United States Marines. In order to demonstrate the difference between this system and conventional paintballing, I'm going to use my unbeautiful assistant, Miss Puke. Mr. Large handed Lauren a wooden tile 30 centimeters square and 2 thick. Hold it in front of your chest and move across to the opposite side of the room. When Lauren was in place, Mr. Large grabbed a paintball gun off a desk and fired a shot. It hit the wood with a loud crack, and Lauren felt a mist of lilac paint spatter her bare arms. Almost no power, short range, and limited accuracy, Large explained, throwing the gun down with contempt. Now we'll try one of these. He picked an assault rifle off the desk. This is a proper weapon, a Hungarian-made AKM assault rifle. There hasn't been a war fought in the last 50 years where soldiers on one side or both haven't used some variant of the Kalashnikov. That's because they are compact, lightweight, and extraordinarily robust. Mr. Large picked a banana-shaped magazine off the table, clipped it into the underside of the gun, and set it to fire single shots. As much as I'd enjoy using live ammunition on Puke, this AK is loaded with a training and simulation round. This ammunition has been designed to provide the most realistic combat training you can get, short of actually letting you fire live bullets at one another. Mr. Large took aim at the square of wood. The noise was similar to that made by the paintball gun, but when the round hit and the paint exploded, Lauren stumbled backwards and the plank erupted into a massive splinters. When she regained her composure, Lauren noticed that the bullet had torn a huge hunk from the center of the paint-splattered wood. Because of the power of these simulated rounds, you'll each have to wear helmets and full body armor, Mr. Large explained. Do not remove them unless you absolutely have to. You will be provided with special water canisters with straws that can pass through your visors. If you need to urinate, make sure you're in a safe position and get one of your teammates to cover you. There is a serious risk of being blinded, so you must keep your helmets and visors in place at all times. Kerry raised her hand. Yes, Kerrykins. Sir, what are the rules if we get hit? Do we have to lie dead for 10 minutes or something? The gerbil bristled as Mr. Large grinned one of his most evil grins. The underlying principle behind this new generation of simulated ammunition is simple. If trainees are scared of getting shot by something painful, they will act in a fashion similar to how they would act in a live combat zone. There are no fancy electronics telling you where you've been shot, or regulations saying how long you've got to lie down on the ground. The rules are very simple. If you get shot, it hurts like hell. Chapter 4. Escape. James and Shaq broke outside onto the concrete ramp, with the PE teacher hurtling after them. The front gates of the school were less than 50 metres away, but the lock was controlled from indoors via an intercom, and there was no way they'd be able to clamber over before the teacher grabbed hold of them. Their only option was the flap in the wire fence they'd arrived through, but that was on the opposite side of the school grounds. James took a glance over his shoulder as they charged back into the main school building. The PE teacher was over 2 metres tall with a rugby player's build, and he was closing up rapidly. To make matters worse, the boys wore flat-soled shoes that skidded hopelessly on the polished floor. By the time James and Shaq made it to the flight of stairs leading down to the playing fields, the PE teacher was almost within touching distance. The boys gained ground by sliding down the metal banister in the middle of the staircase, but this trick nearly backfired. James picked up so much speed that he couldn't stop himself when he slid off at the bottom, and he ended up crashing painfully through the doors. It took a second for James's eyes to adjust to the afternoon sunlight. His heart sank as he looked out onto 2 pitches covered with Year 11 kids. They were playing soccer, and he got a nasty feeling that they'd try and bundle him if he charged into the middle of their game with an angry teacher in hot pursuit. While James hesitated, Shaq had sprinted onwards, displaying an impressive turn of speed. James jerked violently and stumbled forwards as the PE teacher ploughed into his back and wrapped a hairy arm around his chest. "You lot, get that other one!" the teacher shouted, his mouth almost in James's ear as he pointed towards Shaq. The teacher thought he'd captured James the moment he got an arm around him, but he'd assumed he was chasing after a pupil of Trinity Day, not a CHERUB agent who'd done advanced self-defense training. James ducked down and used a simple judo throw, taking advantage of their forward momentum to roll his much heavier opponent over his back and slam him against the sun-baked grass. There was a chance the throw had injured the teacher, but James reckoned he looked tougher than that. It had probably just made him extremely angry, and James didn't want him getting up and coming after him again, so he drove a hard punch into the base of his nose. While the PE teacher wrapped his hands over his face and yelled out in pain, James looked up and rapidly tried to assess his chances of escape. Shaq had nearly made it across the pitch. He had an entire football team on his tail, but it looked like he was going to make it to the hole in the fence and out of the school. The trouble was, once Shaq had revealed the location of the flap, the kids chasing him would easily be able to block it off. James realised his only way out now was over the fence, barbed wire and all. The nearest stretch of perimeter backed onto the gardens of some houses. It was less than 50 metres away, but there were 3 kids closing him down. James picked the smallest one, who was still bigger than he was, and charged straight at him. The kid dropped low and spread out wide to make a tackle. James dummied before spinning out to the right and avoiding him. He stumbled a couple of paces before clattering into another kid who shoved him flat onto the grass. Using a technique learned in karate training, James managed to roll head over heels and spring explosively back to his feet. He now had a clear path to the fence. Ideally, James would have had time to throw his blazer over the barbed wire topping the fence, but the heavy pack hooked around his shoulders made it impossible to get the jacket off quickly. He launched himself at the fence at full speed. The gaps in the wire mesh were too narrow to get a toe hold, so he had to rely on upper body strength to haul himself up 4 meters. By the time he was within reach of the barbed wire, his shoulders were in agony, and his fingers felt like they were set to pop out of their sockets. James swung his leg up onto the top of a concrete fence post, narrowly missing the grasping hand of a footballer trying to get hold of his ankle. He had second thoughts about the 4-meter leap awaiting him as he tried to position a hand on the barbed wire without getting spiked. But the prospect of giving up and getting on the wrong end of a group of angry 16-year-olds was hardly more attractive. As he tried to perch atop the wire to make his jump, the kids down below gave up trying to grab him and adopted a new tactic, violently rocking the wire mesh in an attempt to knock him down. As James swayed precariously back and forth, the teacher who'd been taking the football lesson was practically foaming at the mouth, still convinced that he was looking at a genuine Trinity Day pupil. "Come down this instant, boy! You will be expelled for this!" James gasped in pain as one of the barbs tore into his thigh. He took a quick breath before hurling himself clumsily off the fence. He'd hoped to jump clear of the shrubs edging the garden and collapse sideways onto the lawn, paratrooper style, but the violent swaying of the fence made the jump impossible to judge. He ended up landing on his side, with his feet tangled in a hydrangea bush. Only the heavily padded backpack saved him from injury. After scrambling up, James couldn't resist an opportunity to triumphantly flick off the Trinity boys. He kept low as he jogged across the lawn towards the house. The TV was on, and there were some little kids running around inside. Fortunately, there was a wooden gate at the side of the house that opened with a simple latch. He crunched down a gravel driveway between 2 houses, inhaling the stench of overflowing plastic rubbish bags as he caught his breath. When James stepped out onto the pavement, he leaned against a low wall and burrowed into the mobile phone pocket on the side of his backpack, trying not to think about the growing circle of blood soaking into his trousers. He flipped the phone open and frantically dialed his mission controller. "Hewitt," James gasped into the handset. "I'm outside number 34 Polack Street. I think we might have screwed up. You've got to get me out of here fast." I'm on my way to get Shaq, Hewitt answered. I'll meet you by the post box at the top of the road. James's heart thumped as a police siren wailed in the distance. Oh, you better hurry up about it, he gasped, feeling a sharp pain in his injured thigh as he broke into a jog. Hewitt Asker jammed down the brake pedal of a black Mercedes. Shaq threw the back door open before it came to a full halt, then scooted across to the other side of the rear seat, allowing James to dive into the car. James looked at Shaq as Hewitt accelerated away from the curb. How far did those guys chase you? Only 2 followed me through the fence, Shaq said. I belted one over the head with a garden gnome, and the other one backed off. James smiled, rubbing streaks of sweat onto his cuff as he took his first breath of the chilled air inside the car. So what went wrong? Hewitt asked sharply. James was worried how Hewitt would react. Despite having the air of a laid-back guy with his baggy cargos, tongue stud, and bleached hair, Hewitt had a reputation as one of CHERUB's strictest mission controllers. We set off an alarm, passing through a fire door leading out to the back of the gym, James explained. You set it off, Shaq said, as he threw down his tie and started unbuttoning his shirt. Yeah, James said irritably, as he wriggled out of his blazer. But you looked out the window and said we should go that way. The 2 boys exchanged scowls. Now the car was a couple of streets away from Trinity School, Hewitt cooled down his driving to blend in with the ordinary traffic. Fire doors are often linked to alarms, Hewitt said. Didn't either of you remember that from your infiltration and surveillance training? Actually, now you mention it, James said, nodding sheepishly. I suppose it is mostly my fault, Shaq admitted. We can play the blame game later, Hewitt said, as he took a sharp turn into a main road. Right now, I need to know exactly what happened and see if we've got a mess that needs cleaning up. Did you get the bugs into position? James nodded. Both of them. That bit of the plan worked fine. Nobody saw you in Stein's car or office? No, Shaq said. We only got rumbled after we came upstairs from the car park. And you didn't leave any equipment behind? Both boys shook their heads. Nope. Good, Hewitt said. So the bugs are in place, and there's nothing linking you to Stein. But they still saw us, Shaq said. Use your loaf, Hewitt replied. They saw 2 boys dressed in Trinity uniform. They'll assume you're a couple of local kids playing a prank, or trying to break in and steal stuff. They found us around the changing area, James said. And there's a wallet in the back pocket of these trousers I nicked. Bonus, Hewitt nodded enthusiastically. In that case, they'll think you were thieves trying to rob the changing rooms. What about us wearing Trinity uniforms, though? Shaq asked. Hewitt shrugged. Maybe you picked them up at a local jumble sale or something. Actually, I think we did buy them in a charity shop in town. Besides, a couple of kids breaking into a school are hardly headline news. The cops might dust for fingerprints and show a few mugshots of the local yobbos to the people who saw you, but unless the school kicks up a huge stink, they probably won't even bother with that. So the mission was basically a success? Shaq asked. James caught Hewitt's wry smile in the driver's mirror. Despite the misjudgment with the fire door, I guess you boys did okay. James was greatly relieved that Hewitt wasn't going to go psycho at them. He lifted his bum off the seat and pushed his bloody trousers down as far as his knees. Is there a first aid kit around? He asked. Hewitt nodded. Under the front passenger seat. Does it hurt? Shaq asked, as James grabbed the green plastic box from between his feet. Course, James said, as he ripped open an antiseptic wipe and cleaned away the blood, revealing a small puncture wound that was already showing signs of scabbing over. It's minute, Shaq said, looking at the injury with contempt. Yeah, but it's deep, James said defensively. I think it almost went through to the bone. Oh, give over, Shaq giggled. I've seen paper cuts worse than that. Yeah, well, James moaned. With an injury like this, I still don't think I'll be up to going out on training tonight. Hewitt, can you write me an excuse note? Hewitt shook his head. James, you know the rules. If you think your injury is serious, go and see the nurse on campus and she'll write one for you. Come on, Ewart, James begged. I bailed you out this morning when you found out Callum was glued to the toilet. Give over, Ewart grinned. You practically begged me to let you come. Didn't this job already get you out of some physics test? As far as I'm concerned, you're scheduled for a training exercise tonight, and unless you have a legitimate excuse, you're going to do it. James kicked the back of the passenger seat. Bloody hell, he muttered, making sure it wasn't loud enough for Ewart to hear.